Hello, and welcome to Scandinavia House and tonight's book talk with Gunnhild Øyehaug and her Evil Flowers. This talk will be moderated by Catherine Lacey, and they will discuss her collection of playful surreal stories about love, death, and metamorphosis. This book is out now by FSG, and you can purchase the book here with us tonight, over there. And I would also like to give a special thanks to FSG for helping make this event possible. Scandinavia House hosts programs throughout the year, both in-house and virtually. They include concerts, film screenings, lectures, literary events, and children's programs and exhibitions. So please do visit scandinavias.org for everything that we have on to offer. Gunnhild Øyehaug is an award-winning Norwegian poet, essayist, and fiction writer. Her story collection Knots was published by FSG in 2017 and was followed in 2018 by Wait Blake, which was adapted into the acclaimed film Women in Oversized Shirts. And all books and the film were presented at Scandinavia House in the past. Her novel Present Tense Machine was published in 2022, and Øyehaug lives in Bergen, where she teaches creative writing. Moderating tonight is Catherine Lacey, the author of the forthcoming novel Biography of X, as well as the novels Nobody is Ever Missing, The Answers, and Few, and the short story collection Certain American States. She receives a Guggenheim Fellow and a Whitley Award, the New York Public Library Young Lions Fiction Award, and the New York Foundation of the Arts Fellowship. She has been a finalist for the Dylan Thomas Prize and the Penn John Stein Book Award, and was named one of Granada's best young American novelists. Her essays and short fiction have appeared in The New Yorker, Harper's Magazine, The New York Times, The Believer, and elsewhere. So I would like to bring up Gunnhild to the stage, which will do a reading from this. Her.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to be here. I'm just going to work out how to hold this microphone. I'll read... first, I'll read a paragraph in Norwegian from the short story that I'm going to read in English, hopefully, afterwards. It's called, in Norwegian, Punkte. Oh, I forgot my glasses. Stakkars denne jenta. Hun hadde det nemlig slik at alt ikring henne ble til slimåler. Ikke alt naturligvis, men det meste. Da hun tok eksamen i fysikk, eksamensarket ble til slimåler. Så ble pulten til slimåler, og stolen, og deretter gulvet. Da hun var i et forhold som hun følte var lykkelig, og som ennå ikke hadde blitt til slimåler, kjæresten ble til slimåler. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to continue in Norwegian. Read the same in English. It's a bit bigger fonts in this one. The point. The poor girl. You see, everything around her turned into slime eels. Well, not everything naturally, but most things. When she took her physics exam, the exam paper turned into slime eels. Then the desk turned into slime eels, and then the chair, and then the floor. When she was in a relationship that she thought was good and that had not yet turned into slime eels, her boyfriend turned into slime eels. When she stood in a cosmetics shop and picked up a bottle of shampoo to have a closer look, as it might help to deal with her unruly hair that never behaved as it should, it turned into slime eels. When she sat on the bus to Nesodden once, on the way to see her little sister, the bus turned into slime eels, then all the passengers turned into slime eels, and then finally the driver as well. As you probably realize, these are just a few examples of what turned into slime eels in her presence. We understand that you might fumble, as I do now, to turn the page, to find some kind of explanation, as we have done, and might get no further than the rather cold consolation that sometimes in life it feels like everything you touch turns into slime eels. But having scoured various explanation models, we seem to have ended up here. All this actually happened in the life of this girl whose experience was that everything around her turned into slime eels, as though any opening was closed by this, slime eels. And when we consider how hard it is for us to accept this simple premise, surely this is peanuts compared with how tired and fed up the girl was with everything turning into slime meals. When will anything just be what it is? She found herself thinking one evening as she stood under a streetlight trying to find out when the next bus home was on her phone, which immediately started to turn into a slime meal. The very next day, she got an answer. The day she observed a great tit in the forest, and the great tit did not turn into a slime meal. The girl stood quiet as a mouse, terrified that the bird would turn into a slime meal, and watched the great tit peck at an apple on the ground with a pine needle in its beak. And out of the hole in the apple came a grub, not a slime meal, but a grub, which the great tit ate. It was a small bird, yellow-breasted and black-headed, small, active, and real, and itself in every moment that the girl stood there. What a joy! Something had not turned into a slime meal. After this, she went back to the forest frequently to look for the great tit, and if she was lucky, she would spot it, and the great tit continued to be the great tit, a surprisingly stable point, a point she could build her whole life around, as though she were finally sitting at a window and looking out. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I love that story. I feel like it's also kind of a good a good introduction to your work for people here that might not have started reading you yet. And in general, there's a lot of critics in the American reviews, at least, bring up this word experimental about your work. And I think here that word has a kind of strange baggage to it, because I think, for one, it makes people say, oh, I don't want to read that, it's experimental. I just want to read a nice book. And then for two, it usually means the opposite. In fact, for people that read a lot of books, usually I feel like the word experimental is used on writers that actually are writing in a kind of fabulistic or sort of traditional way, but that starts to look experimental when we're just surrounded by contemporary writing, which is specific in a different way. And this is a two-part question, but one, I was wondering, does the word experimental in Norway have the same baggage, and do you have to live with it? And then two, do you think that your work actually is experimental in any way?
I'm very bad at the questions with, what do you call it?
The first part, sorry. Does the word experimental have the same kind of baggage in Norwegian literature?
Thank you.
In Norway?
Yeah, I think so. I think, but I have, for me, it's a difficult word. I don't really think of myself as writing experimental fiction. I kind of accept that it's a term you can use. But at the same time, I feel like I'm just writing. It's just not. I think writing is kind of an experiment anyway. It's trying to get at something. So I'm trying different. If experimental meant that I'm trying different ways to express a feeling or a sentiment or a thought, I would accept it. But that's, I guess, true for very many different styles of writing, right? So it's. I'm just kind of accepting it quietly and also objecting to it in a way, just by
continuing to kind of stylistically write in a pretty direct way. Because I feel like the story you just read is a good example of it. It's like the style is not trying to do anything crazy. It's trying to bring the reader along for the story experience. But I think. Maybe there's something. I wonder if this is true in Norway also versus here. But I feel like a lot of fiction readers, I think, have gotten very accustomed to fiction being essentially realist fiction, and anything that starts to get anything else immediately needs to be categorized or sort of explained, and then also stamped with this experimental label, which is kind of often ridiculous.
Yeah, I will think of that. I think it's fascinating how difficult it is to get rid of the kind of the division between realistic on one side and experimental or absurd or surrealistic on the other one. I think I often call my own text for everyday realism, kind of just to kind of try to show that that's also a part of the surrealist idea of writing. It's not. It's just a different kind of realism, I think. So it's just. I think it's also fascinating that they are so persistent. These categories. So it's just and it's also it gives you something to work against. I think the idea of what realism is, for instance, or the idea of what surrealism is.
Right, just that like there's this line that's been drawn in the sand of like realism and then everything else, and somehow everything else should belong to each other, where actually everything else is infinite. You know, if we're just like, if realism actually has a fence around it, everything else is sort of, why should there be any definitions or anything?
Yeah, and also in Norway, particularly the last, how many years? 12, since the very strong wave of autofiction has kind of remodeled the idea of realism and also kind of transformed the idea, both in the public debate on literature and also the expectations at the reader, or I don't know, sorry for my English. So you just kind of there has happened some kind of transformation within the realistic tradition, because there's a sense that writers write about their own lives. And so that's kind of and it's also helped me to become more, I think, aware of, kind of sharpened my efforts in the outskirts of that movement, a kind of the autofictional movement.
When did that like really begin in Norway? Because I know like when Naskart was translated here and started to, I think, grandly exceed expectations of what like a very dense, long translated Norwegian autofiction novel in 2015 or whenever it first started to come out. I think when it first started to come out, it was not something that we expected to see a lot of. And here we are, you know, so many years later, still talking about Naskart. But when did that wave of like a kind of autofiction as a kind of cultural object, when did that begin in Norway? And was it with him?
It was with him that it really took off, I would say, and he kind of defined what it was. But it had been, he wasn't the first to write like that. I think it was, I can think of several writers who did that, but they weren't as such a huge commercial hit as well. And I think he was probably influenced by, I might be mistaken, but Lars Norén, the Swedish. Look at my editor. You can nod if it's correct. But it's So, but he was the great commercial success for this movement, and it started in, I think his first book came out in 2009 or something like that.
So you put out Knots in Norway in 2004, is that right?
But that was before that kind of that wave of autofiction.
And then did you feel like in between that and what your next book after that was Wait Blink, or? Yeah,
and that was 2008, and that was also before.
Okay.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know, like how was like, how did having to talk about your books change after that? Did you feel like you had to almost like defend your position of writing experimental fiction or whatever we were calling it?
No, not in that way. But I found I think it was 6 years from my first novel, Wait Blink, to my second novel, which came out in 2014, which is called Undis Brekke. It's the name of the character. And what had changed for me, I felt that the questions from the journalists were often pointing at me. It was a first-person a narrator, and I hadn't really done that before. I felt it was a very difficult form to write in. really like first-person narrators in the longer fiction. I like them in the shorter, but I think they're quite difficult in the longer format. So that was
your first-person narrators here kind of like war with each other often. There's a kind of sequence of stories at the beginning of Evil Flowers where it switches from first person to a collective we, and then like the we breaks down and we have to go back to first, and there's a kind of this awareness of the story. I think that sequence of stories is thread 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know, was that a sort of battleground area for you, just sort of dealing with perspective as a writer, or like what?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that I had really fun with, but also that is kind of an ongoing discussion, both in many of my books, but particularly in this one, is perspective, and how I wanted the perspectives to kind of discuss or quarrel or change within the same sequence of texts, or maybe even in the same text, that you don't really know where the perspective is, maybe until the end of the story. So I'm drawn to that kind of, I'm going to use a word, I'm not quite sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, fluctuant, kind of...
like fluctuating?
Fluctuating,
I guess. Yeah. We should have like a noun for that also.
Yeah, fluctuant. I just made it. So, yeah, the fluctuant.
The fluctuants. Yeah, I like this word.
Yeah. Okay, I'm trying to... what I mean is the kind of something moving like this, like a wave, or just kind of... so to have that in the perspective is important to me, because it's I'm interested in how you now I start thinking in Norwegian. So well, let's get back to your questions.
I guess what it made me think of that specific sequence of stories was just a story collection in general has all these multiple perspectives in it, and we expect a reader to be able to jump from story to story and kind of understand that there is a cohesive project happening, and to see it compacted into just one story was like personally very exciting for me. It was like, this is the project of the entire story collection, sort of like brought to attention in these stories. I mean, and it's also just done so humorously. And I mean, in general, like your narrators or the stories themselves like interrupt each other and sort of like jump in each other's way, and they're very playful and really exciting, even when they're extremely grim. But there's this one part that I really just like lost my mind on. This is a story called Escape, and it starts, the opening premise is that that the cell phone now has a pistol function. Like, in addition to taking pictures, like, cell phones can also shoot people or things or whatever. And like, and it's set in Norway. It's not even America. I was like, but it was, I don't know, very, very strange, and I was following it. But then in the middle of the story, the narrator interrupts, and I just want to read a paragraph of it. But before I go on, I must tell you about my relationship to ornamental grass. If one thinks about the many things one can have a relationship to in this life, ornamental grass is definitely one of them. Sooner or later, a person will encounter ornamental grass. For example, when one is a child and someone in the immediate family plants ornamental grass in the garden, something which one, as a child, could not understand because it's ugly and boring and a nuisance. Because if one is playing bocce in the garden and is unlucky enough that one of the green, yellow, or red balls rolls too far, it can disappear into the long ornamental grass, and one will have to look for it in there. It's horrible. The grass is cold and sharp and scratches your bare child arms as you search for the ball. Ornamental grass is worse than hosta, a plant that many fell in love with in the early 80s. The hosta has big, boring leaves with white variegation, which stand and scream, disgusting, disgusting, in the garden. Some might say that I was an aesthetically oversensitive child to have reacted to something as ordinary as ornamental grass and hosta. But when I reflect on it now, it's possible that I reacted precisely because they were so ordinary. And it goes on a little bit longer, but it's like this passionate response to the natural world. And I think the only thing that has really brought it on is that the narrator looks out the window and just sees a little bit of ornamental grass and is sort of taking it in as a picture. I was just thrilled by this passage. And I wanted an excuse to say it to everyone here. And where was my question? I wrote it down. I guess that your characters often have these intricate relationships to inanimate objects and seemingly like ordinary things. And you always seem to find a way to like work it into the story. It's true in Knots also. And I think to a lesser degree in Present Tense Machine. But what, as a writer, like what is your relationship to the kind of natural immediate world around you? Like, are you extremely sensitive about like where you work and how like the kind of nature of your office has to be in order to produce a paragraph like this, or what?
Well, yeah, I am pretty...
Do you hate hosta? Tell us the truth.
Yeah. I hated hosta for many years, and ornamental grass. But then suddenly I started to like them, and I just thought, why? Why do I suddenly like them?
Oh, right, that's the twist in the story that I didn't reveal, that the narrator comes around.
Yeah, yeah, but I guess, well, as my routine, or how I have to have it when I'm writing, I really like when it's really messy around actually, it's very strange, but I feel very calm when there's a lot of books lying around, and it feels like I'm where I should be. But I'm also very happy when I've cleared my desk, and I always think, why don't I clear my desk more often? So, but I think that I suppose I am probably an oversensitive or aesthetically oversensitive person, perhaps.
What does that even mean?
I don't know.
I'm not like trying to corner you into it's autofiction.
No,
see,
yeah, but it is. I'm just hiding it. No, but it's yeah. I'm fascinated. I'm easily fascinated, I think. By very little details and things, and I like to dwell on those little strange, mundane, often very silly things. That doesn't seem important, but that has a potential for becoming huge and have kind of an entrance into something a bit more serious or deeper.
Yeah, I feel like you find a narrative somehow in looking really deeply at any given object. I was also surprised in this collection to get to the end and to see like a works cited page. And I had like some of the influences and things you were quoting had been kind of apparent, but I didn't realize that you were quoting directly from those works, or like that citing the works were important. I mean, I'm thinking specifically of the Cliffs When Dead, where a woman who's dead arranges to go see the Cliffs of Dover. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Because Virginia Woolf had written about them and she wants to go visit. What brought you to like and then also there's the big Richard Brautigan experience. One of the stories is very Richard Brautigan-y, and multiple of his works are quoted within it. But what brought you to bringing other fiction writers' quotes into your work? Or into these stories? Yeah,
well, I think I always do that. I think that's part of, I read, so it's kind of just a part of the natural world, I think. Kind of texts are just a part of the natural world. As hosta and ornamental grass, and there's also Virginia Woolf, and there's also...
Yes.
So I'm just kind of braiding these different elements of life together. That was such a beautiful sentence. Yeah, no, but and I think also I've been interested in how to kind of write both analytical texts, essayistic texts, and also fiction. And in this book, it's taken form of analysis department, which is present in many of the short stories, often objecting to the previous short story. For instance, they are objecting to a very sad ending. They would like a person who has been who's been very let down by someone she thought might become a potential lover or something like that, and it has been betrayed, and the analysis department is objecting to this sad ending, and they would like anyone who's been betrayed like that should have a prize, like a house or a vacation.
That would be like really well set up.
Yeah. That's not very analytical, I suppose, but that's the kind of the function of the analysis department. So, but also the part with the ornamental grass is also kind of an essayistic trait, I think. So yeah.
I wonder specifically about Brodigan, actually, because he's not very well read here or widely read anymore. And I'm wondering, like, how Richard Brodigan came into your life, and what about his work, if you could speak a little bit about, like, what about his work appeals to you?
Yeah, well, I wrote actually about this in a short piece for the Lit Hub, where I wrote about how I started reading Baudelaire and Rimbaud by accident. So I can just tell you a little bit about that.
Yeah,
because I think I was writing about how and why Baudelaire is a character and because Evil Flowers is obviously a reference to Baudelaire's Les Fleurs du Mal. So I wrote about that. And what happened was that I was going to buy a Christmas present from my younger brother. I was 21 and he was 19, and he is also a writer. And I was looking at Illuminations by Rimbaud at the bookstore, and I thought that this would suit my brother perfectly. But then I read on the back that he was he kind of led a life that I felt like a very protective big sister. I wouldn't lead my brother into drugs and running away constantly. So I thought, okay, I'll just take that for myself. But then I picked out Baudelaire, which was kind of next to it, I think, the prose poems. And I thought that maybe I can give Baudelaire from my brother then. So because I liked his prose poems, but there was a how do you say preface? Yeah, preface.
Although I don't know, I think maybe some people say preface also.
Preface.
I feel like that works.
I always, when I try to say that word, I never remember how to pronounce it. But anyway, there was a poem by Brodigan in the preface, which was the 9 poems about Baudelaire, where he is doing different things. He is one was the poem that was in the preface was they called the Flower Burgers, and it was about Baudelaire opening up a hamburger stand in San Francisco. I don't remember it correctly. I think it said something like, but he would put flowers between the buns, and people would come in and say, give me a hamburger with plenty of onions on it. And Baudelaire would give them a flower burger instead. I don't remember the next, and they would say, and the people would say, what kind of a hamburger stand is this? So sorry for quoting the poem so badly, but I really love that.
I don't think anyone can quote Brodigan badly, because it's sort of, it's set up to be multi-use.
Yeah. But I really, really love that humor, and also the idea of his wonderful poems as burgers. I loved that he kind of took him down from the pedestal, and and that was my interest into finding more about Brodigan, and I felt that was the kind of I think mode that I was trying to reach with my own poems. So he was quite important for me in the beginning when I read I read Rommel Drives Deep into Egypt and the Spring Hill Mine Disaster and the Revenge of the Lawn, which is a short story collection. So that's what I haven't read his novels. So yeah,
I've only read his novels.
Ah, okay.
So together we make a superhero.
Yeah.
I guess since that's kind of an origin, and also people should be thinking about the questions they may have. As a microphone we pass around imminently, and we will desperately need some questions from you people. What other because I feel like you write essays, fiction, short fiction and novels and poems, and you're teaching, and you're talking about bringing a kind of analytic edge into fiction, which I feel like is unusual and is kind of like there's not that many examples of people that have done this before. But were there other examples other than Brodigan, or maybe not even writers, or maybe specific types of pasta or something like this that sort of set an example for you of how maybe you could make your way, or gave you sort of permission or a sort of like entrance point into like working with language in the way that you do? Yeah, well, I think when I started writing short stories, there were two major influences for me, and that was James Joyce, the Dubliners collection, which was a huge epiphany for me to read, and I was trying to write James Joyce stories for a long time. There is actually one in notes. It's the one that I'm least happy about, which is kind of the last of all the Joyce stories that I wrote. It was kind of but then there was, of course, Kafka's short stories, and I think that's the kind of that was the door opener for me into writing, because he has these very short, essayistic, very brief passages about, for instance, there was one called, I think it's called A Sudden Walk. Have you read it? No. I can't remember right now. But it's I think it's 1 page long, and it's about I think it's a young man and his feeling claustrophobia in his own family, and it's told from a we perspective, even though it's just one boy feeling locked up by his family, and how he just kind of decides to go out. So it's very, very short plot. He feels claustrophobic and decides to go out. And then just by going out, you kind of feel his liberation, and that he is... I think that's a wonderful phrase. I'm very hesitant to try to quote it because I'm going to get it wrong. Yeah, one can quote Kafka badly, so... Yeah, but he is... I think it's something like he turns into his true nature or something like that when he is leaving his family and going out to the street. So I just completely... It's beautiful. And also because it feels essayistic in a way. So that kind of... I think that was an eye-opener for me, that you could write short passages with just... a brief moment of somebody's life, and also very it is realistic, but it feels surrealistic. So yeah, this is like yet another reason why I feel like anyone that writes like anything in the vein of a world in which things turn into slime meals, immediately the word that gets put out there is experimental, which is kind of ridiculous, because this is as a form, as a kind of like something, everything's normal in the world, but then a person's turning to slime meals, or whatever the example is. It's a kind of classic. It doesn't feel very experimental. It doesn't feel like you're trying to reinvent the story. It feels like you're very much like working in a vein, yeah. At least stylistically. Yeah. But also I think it's very, I think when I call it everyday realism, I think that's also something that you can relate to. I mean, we all have dreams. So I think the dream imagery is also something that is kind of close to the kind of fantastical transformation that are present in this book as well. Because that's also one of the kind of big themes in the book, kind of transformation as both as something that is, fantastically or something that creates something, but also something that's kind of threatening. Yeah. But also a way of trying to get a clear... what's the word? To kind of see something, to understand something, or to That your dreams are trying to do that. They're trying to get you to pay attention. Yeah, sometimes they're just crazy. I read like most of this actually like immediately in the morning, and I highly recommend it. Like not even being completely awake yet and just immediately jumping into it. Are there any questions yet in the audience? I feel like there are. I feel like somebody is sitting on one. I can smell it.
I have a question. I don't need a mic though. I feel like we're recording. Oh,
for posterity,
right.
please.
I've heard you, not just in this conversation, but in the past, talk a lot about your younger brother and how he's also a writer and he's one of your favorite writers. And I'm just curious whether the two of you bounce off each other or work in a similar vein, and how it was, kind of growing into writing and growing as writers together when you were young, whether you were kind of in that together or on separate journeys. Yeah,
well, I feel I've been very privileged to have a younger brother who is such a brilliant writer. He has kind of introduced me to a lot of literature, to books that have become important to me. He would leave books in our bathroom, so I would find, for instance, I would leave one of the writers that had been very important for both of us is a Russian absurdist called Daniil Karms. I don't know if you've read him. You've read him?
Yeah. He's wonderful.
Yeah.
He's also kind of in the Brodigan vein of, like, I feel like if you've read Brodigan, you maybe have read Harms, but
yeah. So
Today I Wrote Nothing is a wonderful collection.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And he has, for instance, just to give you an idea of how he writes, he has a very short text called Blue Notebook number 10, which is where he writes about someone. He can't really say anything about this person. He didn't have hair. He didn't have he didn't have eyes. He didn't have arms. He didn't have a stomach or legs, and then it kind of goes on by defining him by saying that what he doesn't have, and then suddenly it's best we don't say anything about him at all. But that was kind of that was an introduction that Olav, my brother, gave to me, when we were teenagers, we had this project that we would. My mother bought a computer. This was in the 80s. She was studying film or journalism. So she bought a computer that was kind of rare in those days. And my brother started writing a novel, just a kind of a parody, is that a word, of the crime genre. So it was a detective story, and he would write kind of 2 pages, and he would leave, and he could say, "Okay, it's your turn." So I would go, and it's kind of a relay. We would write kind of a couple of chapters each, and then, but all the best stuff is Olav's, I think. So, but that was, and it was published by the school paper, and I think I was anonymous because I was a bit older.
Who could it have been? In his house,
huh?
But he got credit. It was like
I didn't want any credit for it, so
it was him and anonymous.
Yeah,
but I think you must have been suspect number one.
Yeah,
the other person in the house with the computer.
Yeah, but so I think we did actually find something in common, but then his books are more I would say. Definitely in the absurd genre. I think mine are just kind of a twilight zone between what we were talking about earlier. So yeah.
Is there another question somewhere? Yes.
You speak English beautifully. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
When you're writing, you're thinking in Norwegian, but you know they're going to be translated into many languages. Does that affect the way you write?
Thank you. Well, I have to say I don't really know that they are going to be translated. I think I can hope that they will be. But so I try not to think too much about what lies around the story. I just try to think. Because if I do that, if I start to think that I have to write something that will work in many different languages or cultures, then that will kind of become a constraint, and I will be less free, I think. So So the answer is really no. I don't think about that, because and I also trust the translators. If that should happen, that they are translated, then that it's also that's the translator's job to kind of work out how to transmit or to create a new version of it. So yeah.
Do you do any translation yourself?
Yeah, I do. Not enough, but I have translated. Actually, I read a bit French, so I have translated a French poet called Christophe Tarcos, which you should all read if you haven't. But I'm not going to translate from French again. that was too hard. I was translating as a kind of cooperation with another writer who is much better in French, and we had a lot of help on that one. But I have translated from Swedish, and yeah, I'm translating. Actually, now I'm translating Joy Williams' 99 Stories of God.
That's a perfect Norwegian pairing. I love that collection so much. So you're translating for a Norwegian publisher, or?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So and
I wish I could read that one too.
Yeah. But actually, that was one of the inspirations for this short story. I think I read both Mary Ruefle, which is one of my really big heroes, and Joy Williams, and I felt quite angry when I discovered particularly Mary Ruefle, because she was so brilliant and she was doing. I was it's no point for me in writing anymore. So I just I just give up, and then I wrote this in kind of an angry and.
But it seems that you split your writer self into different versions of yourself, so you can argue with each other. So one of them can be appalled that you're not Mary Ruefle, and the other one can come in and say, like, how dare you be appalled that you're not Mary Ruefle, you know?
Yeah.
So that's helpful.
Yeah. It's a great analysis.
That's actually what this has been.
Yeah.
Are there more questions? Hey, yeah, I knew that, yeah. I could feel one coming from here. Thank you.
Yeah, I just think the translation part is interesting, and you read first in Norwegian, which I thought was really cool, so I'm kind of curious what you think of the translation if you worked closely with your translator, and when you translate, how do you like to translate? To speak with the author, or what's your theory of translation?
Yeah, with the English translations, I work very closely with Kari Dixon, who is the translator. And I feel very fortunate to be able to do that. She is kind of inviting me in. We work often. She would, with the short stories, she will send me 2 or 3 short stories as she finishes them, and then I will revise them, and we will send them back and forth between us 2 or 3 times until everything is kind of resolved. So that's, I feel very privileged to be able to, sometimes I suggest something with my limited understanding of English, and Kari will kind of tweak it, so it'll work. But I think also it's very interesting to see how the text changes in her language, because she has got a very dynamic, kind of vibrant style, I think. So I like that. I like her version of my texts. And when I translate, let's see. I've mainly worked with dead writers, so I haven't had the access to their opinions, but I have actually translated a very alive Finnish, Swedish poet, and then I would ask her, she's a friend of mine also, so I would kind of bother her with all my questions. And that's, to me, it's very important that the translation is as accurate as possible. I would really not want to impose my own style on the translation. I would feel that would be... but of course you do that because you do have some kind of style anyhow, or kind of a range, kind of certain words you like better than other words, you know, so it's it will define your translation in some way or the other. But I think the ideal translation is kind of a transmitting process more for me. So and I try to work as hard as I can to get the nuances correct. And also because Swedish and Norwegian are so similar, it's very easy to believe that you have understood a word correctly, and then it turns out to mean something completely different in Swedish. So it's a kind of, but so the ideal process for me would be to have access to the writer, to kind of get her revisions, so that I'm feeling, I know that she would be content then.
Great. Well, I think we have maybe time for one more if there's anyone else out there. Or I can poke around and take up more space. No, there's somebody. See, I just had to threaten.
So you mentioned that you pick up inspiration from like a lot of different places, like Virginia Woolf and the grass and like pretty much everything you see. So like when you're writing, are there any books, authors, pieces of media that you avoid so that it doesn't bleed into your work?
Yeah, that's a big question. You know, when I was starting to write, I would avoid anything. I believed that to be an original writer, I couldn't read anything. So I was kind of not reading at all. I would allow myself to read romantic fiction, kind of love stories, and I have one in my bag, yeah, but I felt like I'm not going to write romance anyway. So, and I was interested in how sex worked, and so I was when I was 13. Note, and then so it was a kind of I was trying to. So that was okay. I thought that it was okay to read those books, but I was I would have to kind of protect my originality, so I wouldn't read anything else. That was my grand idea. But then, well, it's a very. I'm going to try to make this very long story very short, because I did read something else as well. But then, when I started studying literature, I had to read the classics, and that's when I found out how silly my idea of not reading had been. That I had kind of been. Well, that's what you need. You need to read to become a writer, I think. So, but then there are some writers that I hesitate to read actually, because I feel like I'm very easily influenced by them. So sometimes I would go to. I really love something that the. Writer, I forget her nationality, Samantha Schweblin has said.
Argentinian.
Argentinian, thank you. She said that if she kind of reads as some kind of, she's taking medicine, I'm lacking this, then I'll read a page of Borges, or I'll find something in Flaubert or something like that. So I really like that idea that she would kind of go and she knew what kind of medication she would have to take. So, yeah, and that's a bit like that for me too. But then I don't really read very much when I'm writing. I kind of, I kind of like to close down on my own work. But then if I'm stuck, then it always helps to read.
Is Bernhardt one of your people that will get in your brain and start influencing you?
Oh, that's a very sore point because I haven't read him.
No. Don't. No. You don't need to.
No. Well, yeah, but I'm planning to. That's one of the writers.
Okay, then do. It's really good. So.
Yeah.
But he is one of those writers that I think for a lot of writers, he's a contaminant to be avoided if you're working on something, unless you want it to sound like Bernhardt, because it's just like overwhelming. It'll just makes everything taste like Bernhardt.
Yeah. But another one is Borges for me. Mm-hmm. It's because I read I think 2 short stories, and I felt that this is going to I'm going to drown if I read this. So because I think everything I wrote became Borges impersonations. so I was I have been but I think that's also kind of related to that idea I had when I was very young that I shouldn't read it. So I think just to admit that this in front of all of you, I have to get my act together and read both Bernard and Borges.
You don't have to be superstitious.
No.
But everybody here should definitely get your book and read all of it, or something bad will happen to all of you. So, thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming.